So welcome to the Q&A session, at least the first Q&A session for the Gateways to Blue Skies competition. My name is Janice Miller, and I'm the program lead for this competition from the National Institute of Aerospace. Here at NIA, we manage several higher education competitions for NASA, and we're pleased to work with the University Innovation Project at NASA Aeronautics to present this competition. Blue Skies, as we call it, is in its second year, and we're thrilled, absolutely thrilled, to present the theme Clean Aviation Energy. And we're very thrilled to have all of you here on the call and look forward to seeing your concepts and analysis that you present in your proposals. So without further ado, we'll get going on the Q&A session. Jen, if you'll advance the slides. Today this is our agenda for today. We'll go into welcome and introductions. We'll talk about the context for the competition, and we have Stephen and Andy on the call here today. They will be our chairs from the University Innovation Project, and we'll talk about everyone in our introductions here in a minute. We'll be addressing some things technically ahead of the questions, and then we will get right into the questions. We'll talk about the technical questions, address some programmatic questions, and then we'll open things up, like I said, to some questions that you all might still have. As you're asking your questions, please feel free to use that raise hand function if you'd like to ask anything verbally. If you'd prefer to put it in the chat, we will be monitoring the chat and we'll pose those questions as needed with time permitting at the end of the session. And then we'll wrap things up and get you guys on your way. The team at NIA is pictured here. So you can see there I am as the program lead. Jen Eberly she's here on the call and she is supporting this competition. And is not new to NIA, but is new to our team on the higher education competitions. She's just came over from a different division at NIA. And Stacy Dees is our program manager. And Shelley Spears oversees the Education and Outreach Department at NIA. Over at the University Innovation Project, we have Stephen Holtz and Andrew Preventa, who are serving as our chair and co-chair of the competition. University Innovation Project, like I mentioned, is under the NASA Aeronautics Research Mission Directorate, and they are the sponsors of this program. So I'm going to go ahead and then I'm going to let Andrew and Stephen introduce themselves, but I'll also mention that Kaushik Datta and Mina Capuccio oversee the program, the University Innovation Project program. Stephen and Andy, you want to say a few words?
I don't have too much to say, but happy that we're having a second year of this. Year one went really well, and we're pretty excited to see what you all come up with for this year's topic, and from all of the students in schools that are new as well.
Hello, everybody. I'm Andy Provenza. I'm the Deputy Project Manager of Technology for University Innovation. Very excited to be a part of this competition this year. I was only partially involved in the last one, but some really exciting work in airports of tomorrow, and looking forward to what y'all come up with for future aviation, energy, and fuel. Thanks.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. And just to move things right along, I'm going to turn it over to Stephen to talk a little bit about the context of this year's competition, how it came to be, and a little bit about what we're looking for in the competition.
Sure. Yeah. So many of you probably have heard in some of your initial research that NASA and a lot of the country are aiming for a net zero emission aviation goal. But here in University Innovation, we're reaching a little bit farther, and we're looking at what's after net zero. Going towards lower zero emissions or near zero emission aviation, since that is the future. That's really what's best for the environment and the industry going forward. So we really put that into our topic this year when we're asking everyone to choose a new alternative energy source for aviation that isn't current jet fuel and not SAFs, which we'll get into what that is later through some of your questions. And so we're really hoping that this topic will really bring in a diverse group of students from all sorts of disciplinary and major backgrounds from all over the country to really explore the current research on what's available and to come up with a little bit of maybe where we need to go and how we're going to get there as we look forward to a zero emissions future for aviation. So as I said, right, we're asking everyone to look into a potential alternative energy source for the zero emissions future of aviation, and really figuring out where are we now with that technology, where do we need to go, and how do we get there, especially with regards to the generation or extraction of this energy source all the way up to how you get that energy into the airplane, right? Transportation and storage and everything in between, and really seeing how we can make that whole life cycle from point A to the plane something that is sustainable, viable, and good for the aviation industry. So, what is our vision for a zero emissions future in aviation? I'll let Andy handle that. He's our zero emissions expert on the University Innovations Project.
Okay, thanks, Stephen. Yeah, so like Stephen just said, the industry is currently looking to sustainable aviation fuel to bridge the gap between now and ultimately some zero emissions future for aviation. So there's a lot of investment made in sustainable aviation fuels and more to be made even in the nearer term by some other government agencies looking at just how we get to a point where we actually have enough of that type of fuel. The whole idea there being that the process of creating the SAFs, the fuels, would potentially not harm the environment in any way, but then we would be allowed to harm the environment, if you will, in some ways, hopefully in a reduced fashion, in the air by still burning carbon-based fuels. What we hope to do and what we're looking to do in university innovation is to look for alternative ways, fuels that maybe don't contain carbon, to power the future of aviation. You probably in your research saw that there's a lot of buzz about hydrogen, and hydrogen does look like an excellent fuel. But how might we create enough of that hydrogen to work? Are there other fuels that we can burn, other molecules, other chemistries, other liquids, other types of energy sources that could be used by themselves or in combinations with others to really reduce our impact on the environment? So what is that impact on the environment? Well, there are a number of emissions as we burn jet A fuel today. We've got carbon dioxide, which is pretty much understood to be a significant problem. When that fuel is burned, also particles of soot are created and exhausted out the back, and those soot particles create nucleus sites for water and ice formation. And then those contrails can interrupt or change the thermal balance of the Earth. And then there are nitrous oxide particles that in the environment up in the atmosphere can do certain things like create ozone, and that ozone can come down to the ground and potentially be harmful. There are some aromatics that are added to that Jet A fuel, which also, when burned, create particles which can also potentially harm the environment. So what we'd like to do is try to get to a point where we aren't harming the environment at all while we're flying. So so as we look to the future beyond 2050, which is the date that's been set to be net zero, where we balance the emissions that we're putting out and that harm with zero harm while we're creating the fuels, we would like to continue on and look beyond that. So that's what we're doing in our University Leadership Initiative project. We are funding efforts in zero emissions.
I think, Andy, are you still there? We may have lost Andy. We'll circle back. Stephen, let's go to the next slide.
Sure.
And why don't you start summarizing a little bit about what we're looking for in the proposal and video, and then we can circle back if Andy wants to add anything else about the vision of the future.
Sure, and I alluded to a little this when I introduced it, right? In the proposal, we're really looking for students to pick an alternative energy source to justify, right, how this energy source is viable, right, for the aviation market, for the majority of the aviation market, right, of commercial flights longer than 2 hours. So find not only justifying this fuel, but also going into looking at the aviation landscape of the 2050s to better understand, right, what is that market for the industry, right? So that'll help determine, what kind of planes are we going to fly, which could help you figure out what kind of propulsion you might be able to use for this energy source. Doing that research of the landscape analysis of the 2050s will help people determine, where technology is and where it's going. Where we are and where we need to be for this fuel, and like I said, all those points along the way from generation to the airplane as well. So both technology readiness level, manufacturing readiness level, supply chain readiness level. Those are all things that we expect people to look at and do their research on and write about in this paper. For the video, the video is not too long, but we really hope that this video gives the students the opportunity not only to highlight, who they are and who's on their team, but also kind of summarize briefly what their project is about and what we're going to see in their other products, right? The paper and so on. So, is that is that enough? Or should I keep going?
Nope, that sounds good. Well, we can move on to, like you said, you were going to talk a little bit more about the sustainable aviation fuel and some of the nuances there in terms of bio and waste derived materials. So Jen, we can go to the next slide.
Sure. So yeah, we did get some questions about what SAFs are. We got a number of people asking very specific questions about, are these things considered SAFs, right? How, if it's derived from certain, uh, bio products, is it considered SAF? And so, there's a lot of aspects to that. I'm not sure I'm getting ahead of ourselves. Is that right, Janice? Or should I not be talking about that quite yet?
No, it's fine. It's fine. You feel free to talk a little bit about the sustainable aviation fuel, some of the things we talked about. And just so everyone knows, there are some questions that have dealt with this. And so we will address those very directly, but we wanted to talk a little bit more broadly about some of the things that we saw regarding the questions that came in. And if there are any further clarifications that folks need, as this Q&A session commences, please feel free to reach out either in the chat or if you think of something after the competition, because we do recognize that there are probably still some questions that will come up as you're doing your research. And Andy and Stephen are willing and able to kind of help clarify if any of those things do come up. So feel free to kind of keep going, Stephen, and then we can kind of
Sure.
move on, like I said, to like the next bullet point about the source to tank life cycle and what we're
Yeah, so
meaning by that.
I'll cover it more when we get to the SAF part, but like it does say, right, there's a lot of nuances to what is considered SAF and what isn't, but we're really looking for those alternative fuels that get us away from the jet fuel type of product that really, like Andy said, puts out those emissions that are harmful for our environment. And so, like I said, where does this analysis begin and where does it end for the source to tank life cycle, right? We want you to look at the sourcing, the extraction, refinement of whatever this energy source is, right? If someone's going to use some sort of electrical system, right, where does that electric come from? How does it get from where it's being generated all the way to the airplane? There's a lot of things in between there, and that amount of electricity is not trivial. Once you do your research, if you're doing electric, you'll find that, right? But whether it's hydrogen, ammonia, some other chemical, right? We really want to see how it's getting from A to B, and making sure that that process is sustainable and viable. And like it says on the slide, right, this ends when the energy source is on the airplane and ready for the airplane to consume that energy source. We don't really want you to just focus on the disposal or end of life for the energy source, although it may be something you mention in the sustainability or viability as part of your justification for choosing that energy source. Like that says, that analysis of consumption is built into the competition. So we expect everyone to do their research and to use that research to justify your choices.
Right. So this competition is seeking, certainly it doesn't necessarily stop with the being on board and ready for consumption. You do have to choose an energy source. And I think we've looked at all the NOIs and I think everyone is on the right track. It obviously has to be an energy source that is moving in the net zero direction that Andy was talking about earlier. Or not net zero, zero emissions. I need to clarify that. Okay, so the next thing that we wanted to touch base on, and Jen, you can move on to the next slide. Stephen, if you can talk a little bit about some of the other pieces that kind of came up as we were looking at some of the questions.
Sure, yeah, and we did this year in our competition rules mention some of the, that students might want to mention or look into social, political, and financial factors as part of their analysis, but it's really meant to be kind of things that you consider during the larger impact of your study, right? That the social, political, and financial aspects are not really where we want you to spend the majority of your time, but a lot of time decisions you make in what technology you choose to implement will have broader impact on all of those things, or where we are, on all of those things by the 2050s could also in reverse have impacts on the technology that we use, right? So like some countries, right, might ban certain things or say, hey, mileage for airplanes or cars need to be able to get this much distance per unit of whatever fuel you're using, right? Those types of things have impacts on the industry. There was some language in some of the questions that also for people going down the electric route, talking about batteries, just for clarification, right? Things like batteries are a way to store a type of energy. So if you are thinking about ways to store energy, right, those storage are not the actual energy themselves. The energy, right, would be like electric for a battery, right? A battery stores electric, and there's other types of containers that store various types of energy sources. So, right, focus on the energy source, not the container, but obviously the container is part of the picture in the life cycle from creation to the endpoint on the plane. We do have a lot of I don't want to say vague, but more open guidelines in our competition, right? We don't have a lot of constraints on what we're asking you to do. So we really leave it up to your team, not only to, like we said, do the research and make your own choices for what it's going to be like in the 2050s based on your research, right? But make the assumptions appropriately and justify those assumptions based on your research so that we can see where you are coming from in your vision for the 2050s and the choices you're making.
Perfect. Yep, bottom line is the importance of research and sound justification is sort of the bottom line in this competition. So Jen, if you'll move on to the next slide, I can talk a little bit about our programmatic pieces. So we do have we've noticed that we have a few students that are returning from last year's competition, and we wanted to make sure that everyone knew that there are a couple of new things in the 2023 competition that are different from 2022. So first and foremost, it is important that your faculty advisor sign your proposal for your submission to be valid. So you'll see that in the competition guidelines. That is very important, and we will be checking that. Also, the evaluation and scoring structure has changed for 2023. So essentially, there will be a proposal stage, and then what we did not have last year is the final research paper stage. So that is new, and what's going to happen is the finalists will be selected based on the proposal stage, and then once those finalists are selected, the final scoring will start with that research paper and infographic submission, and it will end with the presentation at the forum. So just it'll be familiar for anyone who is new to the competition in 2023, but it is a little bit different for those who may be returning. The bottom line is that you can and need to provide updates between the proposal and the final research paper. So that's a new opportunity for teams, and we think it'll be a good one for everyone who is interested in continuing their research and participating fully in this competition. So the competition guidelines are also, we've mentioned it a few times already in this call, and you'll hear it again. They are the single most important document in this competition, aside from your resources and research, of course, but they will guide, the competition guidelines will guide what you submit and how you submit it and how it's judged. So please make sure you refer back to those frequently. You can use your smartphone here to get them on your mobile device and have them easily accessible. You can also, there will be potentially, there may be updates to the competition guidelines. We will let teams know if there's a substantial change, but everything that will be noted in the change log on the, I believe it's the first couple pages of the competition guidelines. So like I said, if there's any significant changes, we will notify teams, but we also want to make you aware of that change log. The next deadline is, of course, the proposal submission deadline. That is February 28th of next year. Should you have questions between now and then, you can email us at blueskies@nianet.org, or you can attend the next Q&A session, which is slated for January 26th. All of that information is on the frequently asked questions page of the competition website. And we will also notify and provide the same information we did for this one for all the teams who submitted an NOI. So you'll have multiple chances to ask some questions during this competition. Of course, the finalists will be selected and made public by March 28th. And finalists will then have the next few months to complete a final research paper, infographic, and develop a presentation. Finally, the Blue Skies Forum will happen on June 1st through 2nd of 2023, and it will be in Cleveland, Ohio. So just to reinforce, as Stephen was saying, your research and justifications are key to your success. You will be selling your proposed concept to the judges, and it's important that you think through all of those different things as you're putting together your proposal. So onward to our technical questions. Stephen and Andy will be helping answer these questions, and I will go ahead and ask them. And like I said, if you guys have any questions or clarifications that need to be made, feel free to pop something into the chat. So getting started. First and foremost, does environmentally harmful emissions include only carbon or all potential emissions?
For context, for anyone that didn't realize, these are questions that we received ahead of time. I know they offered everyone the opportunity to submit questions ahead of time. So if they don't make a lot of sense, that's not from us. But
He's right, yes.
but yes, so the first question, right? Is it just carbon or is it all potential emissions? And like Andy said, there's a lot of different things that come out of, you know, the backside of an engine or a propulsion system on an airplane, right? It's not just carbon emissions, right? There's other emissions, even water, right? If it forms a contrail or a cloud, can have environmental effects. So those things are important to take into account, no matter what your emissions are. Looking at, you know, are the things that are being emitted going to have an impact? Those are things that we think are important for you to look at when you're making your justification for your fuel.
Great. And what level of commercial airplane should our project be geared towards? And we also received a similar question. The guidelines mention providing enough energy to support a 2-hour flight, but they don't mention the size and weight of the aircraft. Do we choose our own specs and limitations?
Yeah, Janice said, we got a number of questions about the 2-hour number. And I wouldn't fixate on 2 hours specifically, but we want you to look at, right, the aviation market for the 2050s. And so based on, right, how many flights are going around, how far those flights are going, you can find, predictions or make some predictions about what the average length of an airplane flight will be that is longer than 2 hours, right? That fits, all of the different segments, short haul, long haul, medium haul flights, and use that to drive some of your decision making. There will hopefully be other airplane geometries available in the 2050s. So people will have, I think, an increased number of options for viable fuels that could be combined with different shapes of airplanes that aren't available today. And all of those things are things you can find out during your research.
Great. So the next question is, if we do create our own parameters, can we use NASA's blended wing as our airframe design? And a similar question, do we need to consider the wing design for the alternative source of energy?
We don't expect anyone to actually be designing these airplane geometries. I mean, wing design is something that is important for, how far an airplane can go. So I do encourage people to look at potential, planes that, not only NASA, but NASA and others have done research for that could be implemented in the 2050s. And sure, so blended wing body, hybrid wing body airplanes, those are all things that are viable, right? There's a lot of other things, truss brace wing, so all sorts of shapes out there that are a lot more efficient than what we have today and could therefore justify or make certain energy sources more viable with a more efficient design.
And I'm going to go ahead and interrupt ourselves here, Stephen. Someone did ask a question already in the chat, and this is probably a good time to answer it. Is this competition exclusively related to propulsion, or are we allowed to work on a completely new aircraft design? I think you kind of started to answer this.
Yeah, well, so we don't expect people to do in a completely new aircraft design, but if that's not where we want you to spend a majority of your time, but since everyone's time is very valuable, right? But if you think that some sort of fuel that you're looking to implement would be, enabled by an airplane design that, may not be out there yet, and that's something you could put in your consideration. But, we will be looking for justifications on your choices.
Well, and I think it's also important to note that, bottom line, this is not an aircraft design competition. It is a analysis of fuel impacts and energy impacts.
Yeah. I think one thing for everyone to consider, right, that you are very limited in the number of pages you have to give us your proposal, and so choosing what's most important to relay to us about your choices, designs, and justifications is a really large part of this. So, right, like Janice said, this is not specifically an aircraft design competition. This is really a higher level systems view on, a potential fuel for aviation.
Absolutely. So going back to the 2 hours, Stephen, can you talk a little bit more about what we're looking for in terms of the 2 hours? What would be the ideal flight time that we should be aiming for?
Yeah, and this I'll kind of be repeating myself again because we got a couple of these questions, right? I wouldn't say there's an ideal time, but you definitely want to let us know that you did your research and that your aviation fuel will be able to, fuel whatever or energy sources, not just fuels. Your energy source will be able to be utilized by a majority of the market, right? If it's something that is only applicable to, flights that are exactly 2 hours, then you're going to have a very diminished impact on the overall industry, right? A lot of plane flights are a lot longer than 2 hours on average. So, we want your chosen energy source to have, a maximized impact on the industry and really try to move, more planes we can get, the better towards that zero emissions target.
And to clarify, we are looking for extrapolated information into the 2050s. So keep that in mind as you're doing your research. So the next question, for a reasonable assumption of plane redesign, could you elaborate on what reasonable might mean and what limitations are there on engine redesign?
Yeah, so like I said, we're not expecting you to design an airplane and designing, you could spend your whole career designing an engine. So right, we don't expect people to be designing a new engine, but I'm sure there are levels of fundamental research that you could look up to see, hey, right, is the energy density of this energy source something that is viable? Is it something that could be harvested or combusted or whatever to get enough energy out to be viable? And that's something you can mention right in your justification of viability, but we don't expect you to actually be redesigning an engine.
All right. And how much emphasis should be placed on viability versus sustainability?
I think they're both very equally as important, right? If you have a viable, non-sustainable idea or a non-viable, right? It's one that's one but not the other. I don't think it will turn out very well, right? We need it to be both viable and sustainable to really be something that could be widely implemented with the zero emissions target.
Great. So how will feasibility of technological advances by 2050 be judged?
So we have mentioned this, right? We expect sound justifications of your assumptions and choices that you're making for your selected energy source, all the way from right sourcing to the plane. Um, and so you can look at our evaluation criteria, right? We want you to look at the readiness levels for the technology and the manufacturing and the supply chain. So I think you should be able, if we ask a question about the feasibility um, or your justification, hopefully you'd be able to answer that.
And speaking of feasibility, is there a rate on how feasible the fuel can be by 2050?
We weren't 100% sure what this was asking, but if you were asking about how you will be rated about your feasibility, um, we're not going to smack an idea down and say that's absolutely not possible, right? We're relying on you to use your research skills to see what is out there, right? What existing research, peer-reviewed research is out there, and to use that peer-reviewed research to justify the feasibility of this fuel that you're advocating for.
Great. So can we assume that the landscape assessment is limited to the US, or would our considerations extend to global aviation? And similarly, do we need to consider the whole world's aviation infrastructure or just the US infrastructure?
So yeah, I don't believe we specified one in the rules itself. Like we said, a lot of these things are pretty open to the groups to decide. However, right, I think there's a fact that both the US aviation markets and the global aviation markets are linked. Um, if you had an alternative fuel source that was implemented in one country, but it wasn't implemented in another, now you can only have those on domestic flights. Now, are you affecting the majority of flights? I don't know. It's really important to consider the impact of your fuel and the world on each other with regards to all of this. So I think it's important. I think it's important to focus on a global view, but you are not limited to only a global view.
Now, should teams attempt to scale economic analysis from 2022 to 2050?
And so economics is another one of those things that we mentioned earlier, right? It's important to consider, right, economic viability or the effect of certain things on the economy, but that's not where most of your analysis will be. We really want you to spend most of the analysis time on right on that journey of the fuel and those technologies and how they get from where they are now to where they need to be. So like we don't expect in-depth economic analysis, but if you are doing any economic analyses, you can take in accounts, take in factors such as inflation or other things that you want to, scale over time, like any other economic analyses do.
Great. Now, is hybrid considered one alternative source of energy?
So for hybrid systems, and we do have a number of people that are looking at hybrid systems, hybrid systems are something you're allowed to look at, but usually in a hybrid system, there is a main source of the energy in the hybrid system. And so we'd probably prefer that you focus on the main source of energy in the hybrid system, but you can still talk about, in the justification of your energy source that, hey, this energy source can be used in conjunction with this type of hybrid system. So we still want you to focus on one main energy source.
All right, and let's bring Andy into this question if his mic is working again. Does the banned SAF encompass all biomass and waste-derived fuels? And what exactly does SAF include? Are we able to hear you, Andy? If not, Stephen, you can jump in.
Yeah, I'll wait a second, but I'll attempt to answer it. Um, so the Department of Energy has a pretty good website and definition on what sustainable aviation fuels consider, or what are considered sustainable aviation fuels. A lot of it is, right, having similar properties to the jet fuel, but I would definitely take a look at their more detailed explanation about what is SAFs if you're considering something that you were unsure whether it qualifies as an SAF, since we are not looking for SAFs. Um, there are potentially ways to get non-SAF fuels out of bio or waste derived, can be derived from waste or from biomasses. But they wouldn't be considered SAFs depending on what it is. So if you have a more specific question about, hey, is this very specific thing considered as SAF, we can try to give you a ruling on that. But being bio or waste derived by itself doesn't inherently make it SAF. So if you have any specific questions about that, let us know.
Perfect. Thank you. Moving along in the energy world, would hydrogen directly injected into an aircraft engine made of biomass conversion be considered a biofuel?
And we were not exactly sure what this person was referring to. So you can reach out to the Blue Skies email Janice mentioned with a little bit more clarification and details, and we can get back to you.
Great. And can the energy or fuel source be extracted or powered in a new way, but come with the same result? For example, hydrogen.
Yep. Energy sources such as hydrogen can come from a variety of places, right? Even bio-derived places. Um, or you can get hydrogen from other compounds and chemicals, or get any other type of fuel source from an existing different fuel source type of thing. And these are things that can be considered. So there's a lot of ways to get energy sources and chemicals that you need from other chemicals that might be easier to work with or easier to store that you might be considering.
Perfect. To what extent should we talk about the engine cycle and how the fuel will be used in the engine itself?
So like we mentioned earlier, right, talking about the justification and viability of your energy source is something we do expect you to talk about, uh, but the majority of your proposal will be spent on the parts, after that. So it is something you need to consider and probably research during your project, but it is not the majority of your project.
And to what extent should we talk about the storage of fuel on the airplane?
Well, since the final destination is, being on the airplane and ready for use, storage is something you'd want to consider. You'll probably already be looking into storage when you're considering, how do I, maybe keep this on site or transport this to site for use on an airplane. So we think everyone will be looking at storage in general. And so I think storage on the airplane will be a slight extension of that research.
Great. And would solid state batteries with a focus on regenerative systems, solar, I'm going to try this one, piezoelectric, thermoelectric be acceptable for competition parameters? And a similar question, are perovskite solar cells an innovative, less researched, clean energy method considered researching solar energy, be considered researching solar energy, and would this be a valid research focus?
So yeah, one of the first questions we talked about earlier, right, is that right the battery itself, or maybe the solar cell itself, isn't the energy source. The energy source is right electricity. Electricity is what powers that type of system. So if you choose electricity and you're saying the electricity comes from those types of sources, right, piezoelectric, thermoelectric, solar, regenerative, etc., uh, that's part of your discussion and research about, where does your energy source of electricity, where does it come from, how is it generated, etc. So that's up to your team to decide if they choose electricity, right, how it is generated, stored, transported, etc.
Okay. And will teams be disqualified if they focus on battery or hydrogen fuel sources?
They will not. We did put the specific language that you're probably thinking about electricity and hydrogen sources in there just to encourage people to do things outside of the most commonly researched areas. They are still valid options if your team wants to pursue electric and hydrogen as a fuel source. So we could probably correct that to say electric, not battery, but the question said battery, right? But that goes back
Yes.
to the other question I answered. Battery isn't the fuel source, that's a storage option for an electric fuel source.
Great. And yes, you're right. We'll correct that in the slides so that there's no confusion. Are battery swapping and takeoff assist devices supplementary systems allowed in this project?
Yep, just like I mentioned, if you choose electricity or something similar, right, how you store that electricity is something your research team would be looking into as part of your project. So some people might choose battery swapping. Definitely look at the existing research out there and the viability. Um, Vehicle takeoff is a little bit less in scope of the project, but if you need a specific type of technology, right, or airplane design to make takeoff necessary given the amount of energy or capabilities of your energy source, then you might want to mention that in your energy source justification.
Perfect. How early in the start of the life cycle is required, meaning harvesting of raw materials all the way to manufacturing depth up to delivery of the aircraft?
Yeah, with respect to the energy source itself, right? If it's a physical material, right, you'd probably want to talk about how do we get that physical material, right? So maybe if it would be harvesting or mining or whatever it is for that specific energy source, or if it's right generation like electricity, how do you generate or capture that energy source? That's the first part of your energy sources journey.
Great. Now we're into some of our miscellaneous questions. So what is the preferred method of balancing technology readiness with new concepts? Oops, sorry, we skipped a slide. Sorry. Still on the technical questions. Do the emissions evolved in manufacturing need to be included in the project as far as the refinement process of our materials?
Yeah, and we've alluded to this in a couple of questions, right? But just as an example, right? One thing people talk about for an example of hydrogen is that if you're going to make hydrogen using fossil fuels, right? What's the purpose of replacing fossil fuels with a hydrogen source? So, if you're looking at whatever source you're looking at, you want to make sure that it is viable and sustainable in the way that you're gathering and making that source, right? So if it's hydrogen, right, you don't want to burn a fossil fuel to make it. You need to find a sustainable way to make that energy source.
And what resources exist and are approved to determine the products of various chemical combustions?
Yeah. So just like we don't expect people to design airplanes and engines, we don't expect you to go to a lab and be messing with chemicals for this, right? It is a systems high-level view paper. So we think there are plenty of resources available between peer-reviewed literature and subject matter experts out there that you can, use information for your proposal that is existing. So.
Great. And now I think we're in our miscellaneous questions. So, what is the preferred method of balancing technology readiness with new concepts?
Yeah, so NASA does have a technology readiness level, also called TRL, which is a widely used kind of scale in industry. And so I would look at things such as that to balance and analyze where technology is and where it needs to be and how you get there. And same goes with manufacturing and supply chain as well.
And just to note, it is okay to use something that may have a lower technology readiness level because it's new, of course. But again, it goes back to that justification of your assumptions and rationale. So the judges will be looking at all of those pieces as you pull them together. Next up is the rubric, right? In the rubric section for the landscape assessment, there are technical, social, political, financial, and environmental factors listed. How much of an emphasis should we put on each aspect of the proposal? And again, we addressed this a little bit on the front end, but Stephen will do it again.
Yeah, so like I said, we don't want you to focus too much on the social, political, financial things. We really want you to focus on, right, the technology, the environmental impact, hopefully, which is low of this technology, right? How feasible all of these things it is and your justifications for it. But all of that do have kind of two-way effects with what's going on in the world around it.
And in what ways would it be preferred to measure the social and political impacts?
That there's no specific measurement. Like we said, whatever your group finds or what assumptions you make based on your research, those are things you can mention, but we're not looking for a specific measurement or type of chart with those kind of external impacts.
Great. So what are the expectations of our research sources? Is it acceptable to use research papers we find online, or are we expected to perform a lab experiment and discuss with chemists and researchers?
Yeah, so like it just said, right? Peer-reviewed literature and subject matter experts are great resources. We don't expect you to go to a lab. I know a lot of people find a lot of you know benefits from talking to people in industry. So if you have a professor you could talk to, and they might be able to get you to resources you didn't know exist, especially other peer-reviewed literature resources. It's always a good, good places to go.
Great. And I'm going to go ahead and answer this last question. So in terms of submitting your proposal to a symposia, that is allowed, but we ask that teams refrain from posting their research on publicly accessible websites or servers until after the forum. So we do ask that anything that's public NASA gets first dibs on first, and then those things get posted publicly. However, you can attend and you can present and you can share as needed.
Yeah, and definitely let us know if you do.
Yes, and please let us know if you do. That is something that is very encouraged with this competition, to let us know, how things are going, and especially if for our finalists, as things progress, we like to know what's going on. And Stephen, there is one thing that popped into my mind as we were going through these questions, and that's relating to the infographic. And certainly it's a final deliverable for finalist teams, but it's probably something that teams might want to keep in mind as they're doing this research so that they're prepared. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about what the expectations are for the infographic should teams get to that point.
Yeah, and it's always something people can consider. I think sometimes helping, making an infographic or something similar can help you figure out how to lay out your paper or your presentations, etc. And for anyone who's not familiar with an infographic, infographic is just basically a more visual, less technical way to present your information from your proposal. In this case, probably right the alternative fuel and its journey, and how it gets from where it is now to where it needs to be. I think kind of charting that outline while you do your research is a really good idea. It's always really important to realize that not everyone is an expert in all of these alternative fuels or in the chemistries, etc. So figuring out how to explain it in a way that anyone can understand is really important, not only for your judges, but for audiences in general as you do this research.
Perfect. Perfect. And pay close attention when you guys are looking at that piece of things to the competition guidelines, because the chairs and the sponsors have done a lot of work to try to make sure that you do understand what the judges may be expecting when it comes to that point. So I think, Jen, if you can read some of those programmatic questions, we'll get moving on those.
Absolutely. First question, are students graduating in December allowed to participate?
Yes. So students that are students during the fall semester, when we started this project, so this fall semester, are allowed to participate. But it is important to note that you'll want to check with your university to see whether they can support travel costs to the forum for anyone who's no longer an active student. So that's something to keep in mind. And then the other thing to keep in mind is that the NASA internships are a prize for the winning team. And that eligibility it does depend on continued college and university enrollment. So just keep those things in mind as you are looking to participate in this competition. And Stephen, if you have anything to add to that, please feel free.
Just a quick note, if you have questions about, more about those eligibility, feel free to go look at our internship website. They're pretty well laid out there.
Perfect.
Next question, can we have an external entity help with the video by hiring or asking someone with experience?
So videos should be produced by the team. And we definitely, you've read in the competition guidelines that we do encourage multidisciplinary teams. So if you think that there's someone that you could bring on that can help with the video and then maybe help with the infographic from a broader perspective, by all means do so. That may position your team for success. That said, teams are encouraged to talk to subject matter experts and do their, when they're doing their research and doing peer reviewed literature and looking at all the different assets that are at their disposal. So if there's someone that can help with encouraging the video, please, feel free to reach out. That said, we're not looking to have anyone spend money or time hiring out the video. But if you have an expert that can help with, with it, everyone has access to that option. So.
Next question, for the video, are we expected to make 3D or 2D graphics and animations?
Stephen, you want to answer this?
Yeah, sure. So we don't have any specific right content expectations other than what I mentioned earlier, right? We want to see your team. We want to know about what your idea is. And you only really have a couple minutes to really show that. So some teams will use 2D or 3D graphics, but it is not an expectation. How you want to talk about or show your ideas is really up to your team.
What is the desired format of the final proposed report?
So we have provided guidelines in the competition guidelines. So you can see that on pages 7 and 8. They should be submitted as a PDF, and that was our best guess at what this question was getting to. So if there's any further clarification that's needed, please reach out.
Does the allotted page limit for the report include the references, title, etc., or is that for the body of the report?
So the allotted page limit for the proposal does not include the cover page, abstract page, or appendices, such as references. But please make sure that you are aware and that you've read that all pertinent information for your proposal should be included in the main body, because judges are not required to read beyond the 7 pages. The appendices are meant for references only and calculations. So make sure that you are using those appropriately.
Are additional members able to join a team after the submission of the NOI, but before the submission of the proposal?
Yes. Yep, team members are able to join whenever. However, at the time of proposal submission, that will be your team for the remainder of the competition. Everyone listed on that page.
And lastly, how technical, detailed do you want the report to be?
Stephen, do you want to take this one?
Yeah, so like we said, it is a high level systems kind of analysis of the big picture of all of these things that we've been talking about, right? The fuel, its journey, the technology, manufacturing and supply chain readiness, its environmental impact, hopefully, lesser, and the justifications for all that. So there are technical aspects to it, but we definitely don't want you going into like the equations and uh, you know having a chart with 10 graphs on it that are really hard to read and all these data points, right? So really kind of look at it from a top level view, something people should be able to follow fairly easily. And if it's something technical, finding a way to convey that in a way that isn't, you know, needing a subject matter expert or someone taking a specific couple of classes to understand.
Yeah, so um, bottom line on that one, yes, we're looking for everything to be research developed and that it's credible, and that it's convincing. So keep that in mind. Now we can open up the call for any additional questions or clarifications that may be needed. So feel free to pop anything into the chat, or you can use the raise hand function to ask any remaining questions. And in the meantime, while people are thinking of that, I think that Andy might be. Andy, can we hear you? Oh no, we still can't hear you. He tried to come in on his cell phone, so I was hoping that maybe he could chat a little bit more. But yeah, unless there are any other questions, it sounds like we've covered most things with those questions that were asked in advance, because I'm not seeing any raised hands and I'm not seeing any questions in the chat. So, oh, okay, Joshua, go ahead.
Hello?
Yeah.
Oh, hi. I was just wondering if we're allowed to change our project entirely if our concept before the proposal, even after we submitted the NOI?
Stephen, do you want to take that one?
The answer is yes. As long as it follows the competition guidelines, right? We know some people, right, had only been able to do very small amounts of research before the NOI, or you might be researching more, and you're like, well, maybe this isn't the best idea. You're definitely allowed to change it. The NOI is more for us to understand, how many teams are we dealing with? How many judges do we need to get? What types of ideas are we starting to see? And so if you want to change what your project is, as long as it follows all the other guidelines and things we've been talking about, definitely feel free to change, your selected fuel source or other things about it.
All right. Anything else? Going once, going twice.
I have a question.
Sure.
I know this is like far back, but for the like in June, are we all required to attend the forum or no?
So no, it's not required that everybody attends, right? We're always happy to see more students attend. Obviously, right, if you have a conflict or you're not able to, that's understandable. Sometimes it can be easier and more difficult having more people there to share the burden of presenting, right? But it's also a great opportunity we highly encourage because, right, while it is in Cleveland, right, we're going to be trying to give the students the opportunity to do things like tour the NASA Center, NASA Glenn, where we do a lot of propulsion research. And so there's a lot of opportunities that the students get, not only to engage with NASA people, but other Blue Sky students, and hopefully something cool in the area in addition to the NASA Center that they'd get to see. So it is not required, but we highly encourage it. And I think everyone that was able to attend last year had a really good time.
So I'm
Absolutely.
going to pipe in a little bit on top of that, Stephen, and add to the fact that, yes, it's a lot of fun. We definitely try to have a ton of fun. But more importantly than that, our eligibility requirements do say that you have to have at a minimum 2 members of your team have to be able to come to the forum and present. So while the whole team doesn't have to be there, a minimum of 2 of your team members do.
Thanks.
Thank you, Stacy.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
I have a question.
Sure.
So for our team members, if one of our team members is not an American citizen but is still part of our team, are they still able to show up to the forum as a spectator in the crowd?
The answer is it depends. So if the forum is held on center, there may not be an option to do so. However, by on center, I mean on a NASA center. If the forum is held off-site, then your team member would be able to participate. And it depends at the NASA centers. It also depends on what the center guidelines are. And Stephen or Stacy, if you want to clarify that at all, feel free.
Yeah, every center is a little different. A lot of times, if someone is a foreign citizen or not a U.S. citizen, we're required to fill out additional paperwork, have things like escorts, right, to be with them while they're on site, if they're allowed on site. So that there's a number of factors it can depend on. Like Janice said, it will make a difference whether we're on or off site. We always do have it streamed, so if they just want to watch, that's always something they're going to have the availability to do no matter where we have it. But depending on if we have it on or off center, that might change whether they can show up to the actual venue itself.
Mhm.
And to add on to that too a little bit, we haven't actually nailed down exactly where the forum is going to be held. We know it will be in Cleveland near the Glenn Research Center, but there are a couple of potential venues that we're looking at offsite so that maybe we perhaps can facilitate allowing a few additional foreign nationals to be able to participate that wouldn't be able to otherwise. By the time you submit your proposals, we should have that nailed down. And so if you're selected as a finalist, we'll let teams know right away when they're selected as finalists where the actual forum is going to be and any additional information that we know about with foreign nationals being able to participate at that point. So it's a little bit of a waiting game. Sorry, we can't give you a full answer right now.
Hey, no, that answer was perfect. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Now, I do have a question that was asked in the chat. Probably Stephen, you might be the best to answer this, or Stacy. If we graduate May of 2023, would we still be able to access travel funds for the forum, and would we be able to participate in the internship?
I can tackle those. In terms of the travel funds, that is not something that we can answer. That's something that each individual university has to handle on their own. So I would suggest talking with your advisor to see how your university handles that. For those that are graduating in May, I think there's a certain amount of time that most universities still kind of have you under their bubble as a recent student, that you can still travel under their insurance and all that kind of stuff. So check with your faculty on that. Every single university is different. In terms of the internship, you're only eligible for a NASA internship up to 6 months after graduating if you can prove your intent to enroll in continued education. So they want to see proof that you are applying to graduate schools and those sorts of things, or if you've been accepted into a graduate school. So it's all about where you are in the school process and whether you intend to continue. If you're completely done, I think sometimes they will allow you within 6 months of graduating to still participate, maybe even without that intent to enroll. But I think that is also very, very, very rare. And it changes all the time. And unfortunately, they actually just put out a new contract for folks to run the internship program. So it will change between now and what I'm going to tell you in a few months. But that's typically how it's been in the past, is you have to provide proof that you're continuing to go to school.
We have another couple questions on the internships. So Stacy, why don't you take this one? Can international students participate in the internship?
Unfortunately, no. NASA's policy is that only U.S. citizens can participate in the NASA internships.
And if a team wins, this answers the same question. Does that allow the foreign national student in the team make it eligible for the internship as well? And the answer is unfortunately no. leaving it open to a few more seconds for anyone who might want to still ask a question.
And while they're doing that, I just want to say that the whole internship portion of it is something way above the heads of all of the folks who participate and sponsor this particular challenge. That was something that was decided by NASA Legal at the headquarters level for all of the centers, and we don't have any say-so in that.
I see another question.
Oh, okay. Is there a set number of finalists that will be selected? Stephen, why don't you take this one?
So we can select up to 8 finalists. That number, I don't think it is set in stone. It depends on, right, the quality of the proposals. But at a maximum, 8 is the number that we are going to have for finalist teams.
And there were lots of good NOI summaries, so we anticipate fully that there will probably be 8.
Yeah, and that's 8 finalist teams, right? Each team can have up to 6 students on it. So that's math. So 40 or so students.
That's math.
Um,
The question, how many teams are there at this point?
can we talk? I don't think we can. It's not something we normally mention.
Yes,
That
not
is
something that we normally share.
that is the black box we can't talk about. There's more than last year, and we're really happy that there's more than last year, and that there is an increasing number of student teams looking to participate. So a
It's
good amount.
competitive.
I'll say, yeah, it's competitive. It's a good amount. But I would say, right, that there are still, if you're good chances that if you know, depending on the quality of your paper and your products, that you might make finalist teams. But there are a good amount of entries.
And on that note, we, like Stacy and Stephen have been saying, we're very impressed by each of the teams and the NOIs that we've received so far. And we're very, very excited to see what's going to be coming at the proposal stage. And hopefully you all are too, and you're excited about the level of competition that may be out there. Unless there are any other questions, I'm going to go ahead and wrap up and let you guys know that if there are any other questions that you do have, like I said before, please feel free to email us. We will do our very best to answer them here at NIA, and if we can't, then we'll get Stephen or Andy involved and get you the very best answer that we can. Someone asked in the chat how whether they'll have access to the slides, and the Q&A slides that you've seen here today will be posted online. So you'll have all the questions and answers that were posed in advance. We will also get you answers to the questions that were asked on the chat in written form. And you'll also have access to this recording. So all of that information will be at the frequently asked questions page on the website. And like I said, we do have that question and answer session, the second one in January. I think it's January 22nd. And you'll be able to ask any remaining questions that you have leading up to the proposal stage at that time. And of course, just to give one more plug, that competition guidelines PDF is the most important document that you can have in your hands right now as you research your topics and try to make sure you're in compliance with the competition. So make sure you have that at your hands at all times. Again, we're very, very excited to see what's going to come, and we hope that you are too. And like I said, reach out if you have anything else that you need to ask. Thank you all.